There are very few players in NBA history who we could say single-handedly turned an entire franchise around. And while Dirk had some help throughout his career, he definitely fits into that category. Before Dirk arrived, the Mavericks existed since 1980, but they only had 2 seasons where they won over 50 games and never reached the finals. With Dirk, he led them to 11 straight seasons of winning at least 50 games, along with 2 finals appearances and a championship. So what were the Mavs doing before Dirk got there? They've been around for a long time, yet not many people know about their history. How's it going, fellas? My name's Andy, and today we're gonna take a detailed look at the Dallas Mavericks before Dirk Nowitzki arrived. How good were they actually, and who used to be the main players on the team? But before we start, let's talk about Valentine's Day. Instead of giving your significant other a box of chocolates or fancy jewelry, you should give them the gift of a great show. Thanks to SeatGeek, you can find tickets all over the web for sporting events, concerts, Broadway shows, and anything else. SeatGeek aggregates tickets from all over the web and puts them into one app to make buying simple. They grade each ticket from 1 to 10 to let you know if you're getting a good deal or a bad one. Green is good while red is bad. They even show you a picture of the view from your seats before you buy your tickets. Use my promo code ANDY at checkout to get $20 off your first purchase. You can click the link in the description below to get the app. Thank you to SeatGeek for sponsoring this video. Alright, let's get started. To start things off, let's go all the way back to 1979. The NBA announced that the Dallas Mavericks would be a brand new expansion team, starting off their first ever season in 1980. However, unlike every other expansion team, they got off to a great start and quickly became a playoff contender. As a new franchise, the Mavs were granted the 11th overall pick of the 1980 draft, the pick that they used to draft Kiki Vandeweghe. Now, this draft class was not amazing, it was actually pretty bad. There was only one player from this class who would eventually become a Hall of Famer. That would be Kevin McHale. However, Vandeweghe turned out to be arguably the second best player out of that class. He became a 2-time All-Star and even averaged 29 points a game in a season. The problem was, he would not play a single game for Dallas. When Vandeweghe got drafted, he immediately demanded a trade because he didn't want to play for a new expansion team. So he subsequently got traded to the Denver Nuggets, and every time he returned to Dallas, the crowd would relentlessly boo him. But it turns out, trading away Vandeweghe was the best thing they could have done, because the Mavericks got back 2 future first-round picks, which turned out to be 4-time All-Star Rolando Blackman and Sam Perkins, 2 key players during their playoff years in the 80s. Anyway, the Mavs' inaugural season was rough because they lost Vandeweghe, and overall it was a team full of misfits. They finished the season with a 15-67 record. The only good news was that they found a gem in Brad Davis. Before joining the Mavs, Brad Davis was a bench warmer and played for 3 different teams in 3 years. But with the Mavs tanking the entire season, he was the lone bright spot and showed everyone that he could play. Eventually, Brad would become the team's permanent starting point guard and remain in Dallas for the next 12 years. Moving on to the 1981 draft, this is where the Mavs catapulted their franchise into contenders very quickly. In that draft, they selected 3 players who became the core of the team. They had the first overall pick, which they used to draft Mark Aguirre, a lethal scorer who would become the Mavs' primary option. With the 9th overall pick that they got from the Vandeweghe trade, they drafted Rolando Blackman, a versatile 20 points per game scorer. And with the 24th pick, they drafted Jay Vincent, who would immediately lead the team in scoring. In 1983, they drafted Derek Harper, who would become one of the best point guards in the league. After a couple seasons of development, by 1984, the Mavs found themselves in the playoffs. It was only their 4th season in the NBA, so that's incredibly impressive. Part of their success had to do with Dick Motta. He was a hard-nosed coach, but that's what the team needed at the time. Unfortunately, over the years, he never had a great relationship with the organization in general. Anyway, the main reason for their success was Mark Aguirre developing into a legitimate star. He averaged 29.5 points a game, which was 2nd in the entire league behind Adrian Dantley. Coincidentally, they got traded for each other 5 years later. Also, the Western Conference was relatively weak at this time compared to the East. The Mavericks finished with a 43-39 record, but that was good enough to get the 4th seed in the West. Aguirre and Blackman led them to the second round of the playoffs, where they would lose to the Lakers. That's something you're gonna hear again. They would continue to lose to the Lakers multiple times in the decade. Fortunately, in the 1984 draft, that's where they took Sam Perkins, a tough-minded power forward and one of the first power forwards who could stretch the floor and play outside the paint, a skill set that was very rare at the time. The Mavericks were going in a great direction. They were striking gold in the draft, and most of their picks developed incredibly well. This young, up-and-coming team had a core that was all under the age of 25. But despite the high hopes, over the years the Mavs stagnated. For the next 3 seasons, they would continue to face early playoff exits, the worst of which happened in 1987. The Mavericks just had their best season in franchise history, winning 55 games and grabbing the second seed in the West. However, they got knocked out of the first round by the Seattle Supersonics. It was a huge embarrassment, and it culminated with coach Dick Mata quitting and airing out his dirty laundry. Mata apparently tried to trade their star player Mark Aguirre multiple times, but the owner, Don Carter, did not want to. He also mentioned that while the players were extremely talented, they were too busy worried about their contracts, because it was around this time when the NBA started to get a lot more popular and the money was getting big. It was clear in the playoffs that a lot of players were being very selfish. The loss to the Sonics was devastating in more ways than one. The Sonics' leading scorer in that series was Dale Ellis, who averaged nearly 30 points per game. Before joining the Sonics, Ellis was actually a bench warmer on the Mavs. After getting traded to the Sonics and getting more minutes, he would instantly become a star, one of the best three-point shooters ever. And the Mavs got a lot of flack for keeping him on the bench, not playing him at all, and then trading him away for nothing. However, in the following season, they bounced back, and once again they won over 50 games. But now they were led by new head coach John MacLeod. Along with the improvement of Sixth Man of the Year Roy Tarpley, the Mavs would have their best season ever, reaching the Western Conference Finals. They pushed the defending champion Lakers to the brink of elimination, but lost Game 7. Although it looked like the Mavs were still improving and on the upswing, that was actually the last chance for that core of players to win the title. Because in the following season, Aguirre was traded to Detroit for Adrian Dantley, which effectively ended this era. Although it looked like everything was coming together for the Mavs, it all came crashing down, just like that. In the 1990s, the Mavs were a crapshoot. They were really bad for most of the decade due to a bunch of different reasons. Age, injuries, cocaine, and the Western Conference got way stronger. They traded away the rest of their key players, hoping to rebuild and start over. Unfortunately, the rebuild would take a lot longer than they expected. From 1991 to 2000, they missed the playoffs every single year. They had back-to-back seasons where they won 11 and 13 games respectively. They also saw 4 different coaching changes within 3 years, as a lot of young players on the roster did not get along with their coaches. However, in the mid-90s, they started to have something good going on. They had a few high draft picks and used them to draft Jim Jackson, Jamal Mashburn, and Jason Kidd, the Triple J Ranch. All of them were promising young players, and the organization thought that they would turn the team around and get them back to the playoffs. But there were a lot of internal issues between them, resulting in a string of underachieving seasons. Reportedly, Jim Jackson and Jason Kidd were fighting over Tony Braxton, and they weren't friends off the court. According to former coach Jim Clemens, he said Kidd was upset about the team's walk-it-up style, while Mashburn and Jackson complained at various times about their roles. Clemens also said there is a pressing and dire need for this team to be more professional in their attitude and their work habits. Ultimately, those issues of immaturity would not go away, and the Mavs were done. In the middle of the 1996-97 season, they traded away all 3 of them within a couple of months. That signaled the end of an underwhelming and disappointing era, the complete opposite of the early 80s. However, all of these failures would grant the franchise their biggest opportunity ever. The Mavericks walked into the 1998 draft with the 6th overall pick. They drafted Robert Tractor Trailer and traded him to Milwaukee for the 9th pick, Dirk Nowitzki. They also got back Pat Garrity in the trade and then traded him to Phoenix for Steve Nash. This launched a whole new era of Mavs basketball, and the rest is history. That's all, folks. That sums up the story of the Dallas Mavericks before they got Dirk Nowitzki. It was an exciting ride filled with highs and lows, but the team was quite successful in the 80s. Over the years, they've made their fair share of mistakes, but for the most part, they've been a very well-run organization. Most of their draft picks turned into great players even if there were issues between them. They haven't made that many bad trades or bad signings. When Mark Cuban bought the team in 2000, he was seen as being over the top and way too involved sometimes. He's gotten criticism over the years for being too vocal, but it's better to have an owner that cares about winning, as opposed to one who doesn't care much and just wants to make some money. Thank you everyone so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.